So hello, fellow Earthlings. This is Earthling 6455463728. And Henry Ford, Slavery and Corporal Punishment. What do they have to do with each other? Well, I'm going to get into that in a moment. As usual, I am Earthling 64 yada yada yada. I'm an ex-Army reservist. I have a computer science degree. I have a master's in business administration. I've taken gymnastics for a while. I don't know that I was ever any good. I took karate for a while. I don't know that I was ever any good. I took some life-saving courses as a Sea Scout. And I've had a wide variety of interesting experiences in life. And that's it for me. So, Henry Ford. What I found really interesting about Henry Ford was that it is said that he created the middle class. And I think I did a piece about that a while ago. I just took my daily exercise HIIT session. So I might sound a little bit out of breath. But Henry Ford, at some point, he decided he would pay his laborers well, his workers well. And he noticed that absenteeism, worker turnover, attention to detail, mistakes, maybe even theft. I'm not sure about that last one, but I would imagine a whole bunch of bad aspects of manufacturing from the worker side disappeared. And he said to himself that, hey, if I had known this was going to work so well, I would have tried it sooner. And him doing that, apparently that is what kick-started the middle class, the American middle class. That is so vaunted and is so associated with the stability of the United States. And given that, I think it's a little bit unfortunate that there has been so much of a reversal of that mindset with respect to so many different companies. That is, if they ever followed Henry Ford. I assume they did, because I'm also going to assume that he wasn't the only one responsible for continuing the middle class. Or even, I don't think that one man, even as powerful as he would have been responsible for the entire support and maintenance of the American middle class. So I assume other people would have followed him. But when you hear of the conditions at, for example, Amazon, when you hear of all of the attempts to reduce the presence of unions at Walmart, at Amazon, at all of these different places, all of these wealthy companies, and you understand what Henry Ford, what his experience was, it is insane that none of these other companies see it fit to work or to continue something that seemed to have worked so well. Is it that these people are more intelligent than this guy, that they just never heard of this? Maybe it is that they never heard of it, because I'd never heard of it, and I had done an MBA. So there's that. Anyway, with respect to slavery, isn't it interesting? I have seen documentation or stuff that is purported to be from those days, with the idea that the Negro is, you have to ride them, you have to beat them, you have to, make them experience as much pain as possible in order to get them to do what you want as slaves during slavery. And what I've heard, and maybe it's erroneous, I'm not sure, but that's what they would do. Aside from the ridiculous aspect of stuffing as many slaves onto the ship as possible, where they couldn't walk around, they could not do anything, they were just chained for the duration of the trip, and then having so many of them die and throwing them overboard when maybe you could have done what they did in the Bible with respect to Daniel and the people that followed him, whereby Daniel told I think it was the manservant of the king of Persia, that he should allow the Jewish people to eat their traditional foods, and the guy didn't want to. But when he did allow them to eat what they wanted to eat, they ended up being much healthier than the people who were served the food from the king's court. So, a lot of people like to look in the past and say that was what people knew at that time, and maybe they didn't know how to read. Maybe a lot of these people didn't know how to read, and maybe just plain common sense did not trickle through, but it was there, it was available. Even if you're supposed to be Christian, all of this stuff is in the Bible, and they had Bibles around those times. So even from a perspective of just being a good person, we can't excuse it and say, well, everybody was doing it, kind of thing. Unless we're going to give people a free pass with respect to being Nazis and saying, well, everybody was doing it, so then why do we try any of these people? I don't know. But anyway, it would have been ridiculous to do what they were doing with respect to transporting those slaves in poor conditions and having so many die. It also would be ridiculous of treating these slaves poorly when they're on the plantations and then having a bunch of them die only for you to have to go back and buy more. And the whole idea is, Henry Ford, so many hundreds of years in the future, realized that if you treated people well, that absenteeism, truancy, just maybe slaves running away, maybe all of those things, maybe if you gave them more freedom, they wouldn't want to revolt and then try to kill you and your family and everybody, or run away and escape from the plantation. So it's kind of crazy. But what if, by not enslaving people and treating them poorly, even though they were slaves, that all of those people involved, everybody involved, could have been much richer? What if slavery was a big, fat waste of time? What if the more you tried to exert your power over people, the more they tried to resist, and that in turn reduced the output, which is really what you wanted at the end of the day? And I mean, it doesn't really need to be said by me, but with respect to corporal punishment, in many places in the world, corporal punishment of your kids, of whoever is involved, it's no longer implemented. In many other places it is. But what psychiatrists tell us is that corporal punishment often may worsen the situation. It would destroy your relationship with your kids. It could harm it at the very least. It could certainly harm your relationship. And, there are a lot of people who make the claim that, hey, I was, whooped as a kid, and look how great I turned out. It is all really well to use your oral cavity in order to make sounds to convince someone. That is not proof of anything. I'll give you an example, and we all know people lie, that's a fact, but I'll give you an example. I remember I knew a girl who, I shouldn't have done it, but I said to her, we were having a discussion, she was giving me advice, I didn't really agree with the advice, so at the end of the day I said, listen, I have an MBA. And so she said, well, I have an MBA too. And I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting, cool. I had a much longer conversation with her on another occasion, and basically she told me that she took, or registered maybe, just registered to start taking MBA, and she never took it. she never even reached halfway. She never went through a semester. And that's pretty much how easy it is to lie or to distract from the fact that your life might be a complete and utter mess as a result of corporal punishment, which is what the psychiatrists tell us, who have compiled all of these studies based on many, many, many different people's anecdotal experiences, rather than just one anecdotal experience, which could be a complete and utter aberration. But what psychiatrists tell us is that corporal punishment, it doesn't help. It, if anything, as I mentioned before, it just increases the animosity that the person would have for you, and it may destroy your relationship with them. Of course, if you have a slave master and this person has beat you, you're going and you've been in exceeding pain, perhaps to the point of death, you and everybody around will do what's right or good as long as you're being watched, because you don't want to end up in that situation again. But you also, of course, would hate the person and would want to do anything that you could to hurt them the way that they hurt you, or the way that you saw that they hurt someone else you can relate to. So whether that might be, poisoning that person, whether it might be making them sick, whether it might be not performing, doing things that are in the best interest of them. I'm sure that slaves did as much as they possibly could in many instances to counteract, to contradict, to anything that they could get away with. I'm sure they would have done it. And when we look at modern capitalism, it's always touted that greed is good. Greed is what makes capitalism work, because everybody can see what a way to, at the same time, deliver a service or a good at as cheap a way as possible, and maximize their gains, and as well as maximize the gains of the people who they're providing the goods or service for. And that competition will lead to a prosperity for everybody. Obviously, when you have someone who you aren't treating well, because you're giving them whatever the worst kind of foods, like chitlins, for example, you are working them every single day, in many instances without a break. There's no rest day. That's not going to make them healthy. If you are packing them on board ships, you're going to end up with many of them dying. Maybe you dying from communicating some disease. But back to the plantation, everything and worse that Henry Ford would have encountered before he raised his workers' salaries would have been in slavery. So in many ways, it's a miracle that it actually worked the way that it did. I mean, there's been slavery throughout history, granted. That said, there's never been as easy a way as determining who is a slave as there has been with respect to judging people by the color of their skin. And everybody and anybody could treat someone poorly by recognizing, oh, that's the slave, or the descendants of a slave, or whatever. And that even happens today. And I'm just thinking that everything that slavery achieved was probably the bottom of the barrel of what it could have achieved by just having more lax rules, or giving people more freedom, or maybe just mandating freedom, period. Like indentureship, for example. Or like you're not allowed to take someone's kids or children. How much better life could have been if people had chosen to be better, or the government had chosen to be better. It's just interesting again, to take a look at that and see that on the one hand, capitalism and Western philosophy, we believe in it, but even today, the way that there are sweatshops all around the world, and that same kind of thing continues to happen with people not realizing that you can treat people well and have good results at the same time. Anyway, that's it for me. Feel free to look at any more of my videos if you like. You can comment, subscribe, share, like, unlike, any of the things that you would want somebody to do if this were your recording. Have a good one. Peace.